I used to believe that survival meant safety, that as long as you were breathing, as long as your heart still beat inside your chest, there was hope. That was the first lie the Dark Eldar burned out of me. I was not born in darkness or war or prophecy. I was no hero, no soldier of legend, just another nameless human living on the edge of the Imperium, working the fields beneath a tired sky, believing the galaxy was cruel but distant. The Dark Eldar were stories told to frighten children and inexperienced guardsmen, monsters whispered about over cheap alcohol, not something real, not something that would ever step into my life. Then the night tore open and proved how foolish that belief was. It began without warning, without drums or declarations of war, because the Drukhari do not announce suffering, they simply deliver it. One moment the settlement slept under pale moonlight, the next the sky screamed as reality split apart and sleek, bladed silhouettes poured through a wound in the air itself. Alarms rang, people shouted, weapons fired wildly into the dark, but it was already over before we understood we were under attack. Green flashes of alien fire stitched across the streets, bodies dropped where they stood, convulsing as crystalline toxins burned them from the inside out. I remember trying to aim my lost gun, hands shaking, watching figures move too fast, too gracefully, like predators amused by clumsy prey. They did not fight us as enemies, they hunted us as livestock. I saw one of them land near me, pale and elegant, smiling as if this were a performance staged for her enjoyment. I fired and missed, and then she was on me, pain exploding in my chest as I hit the ground, breath crushed from my lungs. I waited for death, welcomed it even, because some instinct deep inside me understood that capture was worse. But death did not come. A blow to my head sent the world spinning into darkness, and when I woke, I was bound, gagged, and piled among other captives in the back of a skimmer that hummed with alien energy. Below us, my home burned. Not conquered, not occupied, simply destroyed because the Drukhari take what they want and discard the rest. As we rose into the air, I saw bodies hanging from hooks on passing craft, trophies still twitching, and something inside me broke quietly, the part that still believed the universe was fair or rational. We passed through the tear in reality, a webway portal, though I had no word for it then, and my senses rebelled as space twisted and time lost meaning. Colors that should not exist smeared across my vision, laughter echoed from nowhere, and for a moment I felt as if my soul were being pulled away from my body, stretched thin like meat on a rack. When it ended, we emerged beneath a blood-red sky that never changed, never brightened, never offered relief. Commorragh, the Dark City. Even before I knew its name, I knew it was wrong. The air tasted of metal and fear. The skyline rose in impossible spires of black glass and bone, bridges hanging over endless voids, and distant screams blended with cruel laughter into a constant living soundscape. This was not a city built for life, it was built for suffering. We were dragged from the skimmers and lined up under the gaze of our captors, prodded, scanned, evaluated like animals at a market. When one man tried to resist, tried to remind himself he was still human, his throat was opened with casual precision and his body dragged away, leaving a smear of blood that no one bothered to clean. That was when I learned the second lie, that resistance always meant dignity. In Commorragh, resistance is simply another flavor of entertainment. We were herded through corridors carved with leering faces and living shadows, past scenes of casual cruelty so routine that the Dark Eldar barely noticed them, slaves scrubbing blood from floors, others hauling carts of limbs and corpses, all under the watchful eyes of armored overseers. I wanted to look away, but I forced myself to see because something told me that ignorance would not protect me here. We were thrown into a holding pen beneath the open, bleeding sky, packed together with captives from a dozen worlds, and the gate sealed with a crackling force field. That was where an old slave whispered the truth to me in a voice worn thin by screaming, that pain was not a punishment here, it was a resource, that the Dark Eldar did not kill us because they needed us alive, suffering, feeding their twisted existence. Before I could ask more, agony tore through my body as the pen's shock field activated, dropping us all to our knees, and a Drukhari overseer welcomed us to our new lives with a smile that promised there would be no end to this. As I lay there shaking, tasting blood, staring up at a sky that looked like it had been soaked in gore, I realized with cold clarity that I was still alive, and that this meant absolutely nothing. In Commorragh, survival is not hope. Survival is simply the beginning. Time does not exist properly in Commorragh, and in the slave pens it becomes meaningless altogether. There is no sunrise to mark a new beginning and no nightfall to promise rest. Only the same blood-hued twilight pressing down on you until your thoughts grow sluggish and distorted. After the overseers left us in the pen, something strange happened inside my mind. At first, I counted heartbeats, breaths, the number of screams echoing from somewhere beyond the walls, anything to anchor myself to the idea that I was still a person experiencing events in sequence. That illusion didn't last long. Hunger arrived quietly, then thirst, then a deep aching exhaustion that no amount of rest could ease. The Dark Eldar fed us just enough to keep our bodies functional, a foul nutrient slurry poured into a trough like animal feed. Pride died quickly after that. You drink because the alternative is weakness, and weakness is noticed. And being noticed is dangerous. Around me I watch people change. Not dramatically at first, not in the way stories describe madness, but slowly, subtly, like erosion. People stopped asking questions. They stopped crying out loud. They stopped using names. One by one, identity was stripped away until we were little more than breathing shapes pressed together in a cage. The Drukhari came and went as they pleased, selecting slaves without explanation, sometimes for labor, sometimes for sport, sometimes for reasons we never learned. Those taken rarely returned, and when they did, they were altered, bodies patched together with alien craftsmanship, eyes dull, movements stiff, as if something essential had been hollowed out and discarded. That was when I began to understand the true structure of this place. Commorragh is not chaos. It is a system. Pain is its currency. Suffering is measured, refined, and harvested with the same care the Imperium applies to tithes and taxes. The Dark Eldar do not merely enjoy cruelty, they depend on it. Every scream strengthens them, every broken mind feeds their souls, and we, the slaves, are the mines from which that wealth is extracted. I learned this not from lectures, but from observation. The overseers treated certain captives differently, guarding them more carefully, preserving them, because some individuals produced better suffering than others. Hope, I realized, was not forbidden here, it was encouraged because despair tastes sweeter when it follows expectation. An old slave near me, his skin stretched tight over bone, whispered fragments of truth when the guards weren't watching. He told me there were hierarchies even among the damned. Labor slaves worked until their bodies failed. Arena slaves died screaming for applause. Art slaves endured things no sane mind could describe. And then there were the homunculi, flesh crafters and masters of agony, who took those they found interesting and returned them only when they were finished, if they returned them at all. When he spoke of them, his voice shook in a way that told me words were insufficient. I began to notice the devices embedded in the walls of the pen, emitters that could flood our nerves with pain at the press of a button, not as punishment for disobedience but as reminder, The Dark Eldar did not need us to rebel. They needed us to remember who controlled reality. Occasionally, a new batch of captives arrived, fresh from real space, still clinging to beliefs about mercy or negotiation. They did not last long. Either they broke quickly or they were taken quickly. The city itself seemed alive, watching, waiting, its distant screams rising and falling like breath. I saw beings that were not human, not Eldar, chained and penned alongside us. Proof that the Drukhari preyed on the entire galaxy without discrimination. One day, a Craftworld Eldar slave looked at me with something like pity and whispered that the Dark Eldar feared death more than any other beings in existence. That their cruelty was not born from strength but desperation. That without suffering to consume, their souls would rot away into something worse. That knowledge did not comfort me. It only deepened the horror because it meant our pain was not excess, it was necessary. I began to feel myself changing too. My thoughts grew colder, more practical. I learned when to avert my gaze and when to look directly at my captors, when silence was safer than speech and when a quick, submissive response might buy a few more hours of existence. I stopped thinking about escape because the idea no longer made sense. Escape to where? The dark city is infinite, layered, hostile, filled with things worse than cages. Freedom here is a lie, just another method of control. The worst part was not the physical suffering, though there was plenty of that. It was the slow realization that the Dark Eldar were winning inside my head. I caught myself thinking in their terms, measuring pain, anticipating cruelty, adjusting expectations downward until survival itself became a hollow objective. One moment stands out more than any other. A woman in the pen who had clung desperately to prayers and whispered hymns was taken and returned days later. She was alive technically. Her wounds were healed, her body intact, but her eyes were empty, her lips moving soundlessly as if reciting something only she could hear. When the shock field activated again, she did not react. She did not scream. The overseers noticed. Interest flickered. She was taken again shortly after. I never saw her return. That was when I understood the final truth of the pens. Pain is valuable, but numbness is not. To survive in Commorragh, you must suffer properly. And as that realization settled into my bones, as the distant laughter of our masters echoed through the metal and stone, I felt the last fragile pieces of my old self slipping away, because I knew with absolute certainty that something far worse than the pens was coming for me next. And that whatever walked out of it would not be the person who had once believed survival meant safety. They came for me without ceremony, without explanation. And by then I had learned that questions only existed to make suffering richer. The force field dropped for a fraction of a second and barbed hands seized me, dragging me from the pen as the others looked away, not out of cruelty, but because watching made the waiting worse. The corridors we passed through grew narrower and colder the deeper we went, the air thick with chemical sweetness and rot, a smell that clung to the back of the throat and never quite left. The screams changed down there, becoming more focused, more deliberate, less chaotic, as if pain itself were being refined into something purer. When I first saw the homunculus, my mind refused to assemble him into something real. He looked less like a living being and more like an experiment that had forgotten to end, his elongated frame draped in stitched flesh and metal, limbs too thin, joints bending at wrong angles, his face stretched into a permanent mockery of a smile that never reached his mismatched eyes. He studied me the way a scholar studies a text, not with hatred, not even with enthusiasm at first, but with professional curiosity. That was the most terrifying part. I was not an enemy. I was material. He spoke softly, almost kindly, explaining nothing while promising everything, his voice carrying the calm assurance of someone who knew exactly how much pain a body could endure and how to push just a little further. I was strapped to a cold slab before I could gather the strength to resist, restraints snapping shut with mechanical finality, and when I struggled, the punishment was immediate and educational. A single touch from a slender instrument sent lightning through my nerves, dropping me into helpless spasms, my body betraying me completely. The homunculus observed my reactions with interest, adjusting dials, making notes on devices I did not recognize, as if charting data rather than dismantling a human being. He explained, not to reassure me but to savor my fear, that pain was not merely inflicted here, it was engineered. Each sensation was calibrated, each wound designed not to kill, not even to maim permanently, but to teach my nervous system new definitions of suffering. When he removed my eye, it was done with exquisite precision, the moment stretching into an eternity of white-hot agony and disbelief, and when darkness swallowed half my vision, I thought that was the end of what I could endure. I was wrong. He returned the eye moments later using a device that crawled into the socket and stitched reality back together, restoring sight just in time for me to understand that this mercy was temporary. He laughed then, delighted, explaining that despair tasted best when hope was allowed to live just long enough to be crushed. Time dissolved into pain. He flayed, healed, broke, and restored me in cycles that destroyed my sense of sequence, my body becoming a canvas for his art and a laboratory for his science. At one point, he injected something into my bloodstream that amplified sensation until the brush of air felt like fire, until my own heartbeat was unbearable, and when I screamed myself hoarse, he rewarded me by repairing my vocal cords so I could scream again. I learned that the homunculi do not fear death because they have conquered it in their own way, dragging souls back into ruined bodies, stitching consciousness together from fragments, refusing to let suffering end simply because the flesh has failed. When I begged him to kill me, he looked genuinely offended, as if I had misunderstood the entire purpose of our interaction. Death, he explained, was an ending, and endings were wasteful. What he wanted was continuation. When he finally finished, when my mind hovered on the edge of collapse and my body felt like a collection of unrelated injuries barely held together by alien craftsmanship, he sent me away not discarded, but preserved. I was returned to a cell, patched, altered, weaker yet harder to kill, my nerves humming with phantom pain that never fully faded. That was when the real horror set in, not during the torture itself, but afterward, when I realized that part of me had adapted. I remembered the procedures with terrifying clarity, not just the agony but the logic behind it, the methods, the efficiency. I hated myself for that understanding, hated the part of my mind that had begun to see pain as a system rather than an event. In the darkness of the cell, listening to distant screams that sounded uncomfortably familiar, I understood the homunculus's true victory. He had not simply hurt me. He had educated me. He had shown me the rules of Commorragh at their most intimate level, had rewritten my expectations of what a body was allowed to feel and still exist. And as I lay there, breathing shallowly, knowing that this had been an introduction rather than a finale, I felt something inside me settle into a cold, terrible acceptance, because I understood now that survival here did not depend on strength or courage, but on how much of yourself you were willing to let them take piece by piece without letting the body finally give up. After the homunculus, the pens felt almost merciful, and that realization frightened me more than anything he had done. I was returned among the others not as I had been taken, but altered, my body subtly reinforced, my pain responses sharpened and stretched, my endurance extended beyond anything I would have believed possible before Commorragh rewrote me. The other slaves sensed it immediately. They looked at me differently, with a mixture of fear and envy, because to endure the attention of a homunculus in return was a mark, a sign that your suffering had value. I wanted to scream at them that this was not a blessing, that it was a sentence, but words felt useless now. In Commorragh, value is the most dangerous thing a slave can possess. It was not long before I learned why. One cycle, without warning, the city shook. Not violently, not with the chaos of invasion, but with a controlled, deliberate tension that rippled through the walls and corridors like a living thing drawing breath. The overseers became more alert, more aggressive, their cruelty sharpened by urgency. Whispers spread among the slaves, fragments of half-understood truth carried from pen to pen by those who cleaned blood-stained floors or hauled broken bodies through the lower levels. A rival cable was attacking. A political dispute had escalated. Somewhere above us, Dark Eldar were killing Dark Eldar, and the city itself was feasting. This was when the illusion of hope crept in, subtle and treacherous. Some slaves began to believe that chaos meant opportunity, that distraction might allow escape or rebellion. I felt the pull of that thought myself, the old human instinct reaching desperately for any crack in the walls. That instinct nearly killed me. My master decided the time had come for me to be seen. Not examined, not refined in silence, but displayed, and in Commorragh that can only mean one thing. The arenas are the beating hearts of the Dark City, places where cruelty is elevated to ritual and pain is transformed into spectacle. And when he told me I would fight there, he did not frame it as punishment or reward, but as inevitability. I was prepared carefully, my wounds healed, my muscles strengthened through methods I never asked to understand, my reflexes sharpened until my body reacted before my thoughts could form. They wanted me capable, not victorious, because victory would end the show too quickly. When the gates opened and the roar of the crowd hit me, it was like stepping into a living storm. Tens of thousands of Dark Eldar screamed and laughed and chanted, their pleasure rolling over me in waves, a psychic pressure that pressed into my skull and made it hard to breathe. I saw other slaves in the arena, some armed, some half-naked and already bleeding, all of us arranged like pieces on a board designed for slaughter. The first fight was chaos. Blades flashed, bodies collided, screams tore from throats as the crowd reacted to every strike, every mistake. I killed a man in the first moments, my blade sliding into his chest almost by accident, and as he died in my arms, confusion and betrayal in his eyes, something inside me recoiled. I had sworn once that I would never become this, that I would not survive by destroying others who were just as trapped as I was. That vow lasted seconds. A blast of pain surged through my spine from an embedded control device, my master's reminder that hesitation was unacceptable. The next time I struck, I did not hesitate. The crowd loved that. I could feel it, their approval sharpening the air, their hunger focused on me like a lens. Between bouts, I was dragged aside, patched just enough to continue, forced to watch others fight and die while the Dark Eldar critiqued technique and expression as if discussing art. That was when I understood the arena's true purpose. It was not just to kill. It was to teach. To train slaves to associate survival with performance, to replace morality with instinct, to make cruelty feel necessary and hesitation feel lethal. Each time I stepped back onto the sand, I felt myself changing, my movements smoother, my reactions faster, my mind quieter. Fear never left, but it transformed, becoming a tool rather than a paralysis. I learned how to draw out a fight, how to let myself be wounded just enough to excite the crowd, how to time a kill for maximum reaction. When I did it well, the pain was less. When I failed, it was unimaginable. Other slaves noticed. Some begged me for help, for alliance, for mercy, and each time I faced the same calculation. Help them and risk both our lives, or turn away and live a little longer. I chose myself more often than not. That was the final collapse, the moment when I realized that Commorragh had succeeded where the homunculus had only begun. I was no longer just enduring horror. I was participating in it. The worst moment came when I recognized enjoyment flickering at the edges of my consciousness. Not joy, not satisfaction, but a grim relief when I survived, when the crowd roared, when my master's gaze lingered with approval. I hated that feeling more than any pain they inflicted, because it meant something vital had been compromised. I was pulled from the arena eventually, not because I was broken, but because I was effective. My master was pleased. I had become an asset, a performer who could be relied upon to deliver the right kind of suffering. As I stood beside him in the viewing galleries, watching other slaves fight and die where I had stood, I felt a hollowness that no scream could fill. I understood now why the Dark Eldar valued the arenas so highly. They did not just feed on pain. They fed on transformation, on the slow, deliberate erosion of everything that made their victims different from them. And as the crowd roared and the blood soaked into the sand, I knew there was only one stage left in this descent, one final truth waiting for me beyond the applause, because in Commorragh, survival earned you nothing except the chance to be broken in a new and more intimate way. There is a moment in every slave's existence when resistance finally ends, not with a scream or a declaration, but with a quiet internal decision that no one else can see. Mine came after the arena, after the cheers and the blood and the realization that I had become reliable. My master no longer looked at me as a novelty or a gamble, but as something proven, something worth keeping. That was when he claimed me fully. The chains changed, becoming finer, more precise, embedded with controls that responded not just to movement but to emotion, tightening when fear spiked, burning when defiance even flickered across my thoughts. I was brought closer to him, kept not in the pens but in his personal domain, a place of polished cruelty where suffering was curated rather than chaotic. I became part of his daily existence, a presence meant to remind him of his power and to feed it. I learned that ownership in Commorragh is not about labor or obedience alone. It is about intimacy. To be owned is to be known, studied, shaped until your reactions are predictable and exploitable. He spoke to me often, not as one speaks to an equal, but as one speaks to a tool they have refined themselves, explaining how my survival was a reflection of his skill, how every scream I produced was an extension of his will. And slowly, horrifyingly, I understood he was right. My suffering no longer felt random. It had context, structure, purpose. That realization should have broken me completely, but instead it settled into something colder. Acceptance. Not forgiveness, not loyalty, but recognition of reality as it was, stripped of illusion. I stopped dreaming of escape. I stopped imagining rescue. The Imperium, the Emperor, the stars beyond the webway all faded into abstract concepts, distant myths with no bearing on my existence. What mattered was the present, the next command, the next performance, the next carefully measured agony. I still felt pain endlessly, exquisitely, but I no longer fought it the way I once had. I learned how to endure efficiently, how to preserve myself just enough to remain useful, how to give my master what he wanted without provoking worse attention from those like the homunculi. In doing so, I crossed a threshold I had once believed inviolable. I was no longer merely a victim of evil. I was a component of it. That knowledge haunted me more than any torture, because it meant there was no clean ending to this story, no moment where I could reclaim who I had been. Even death, I knew now, would not be freedom. Death here was reversible, negotiable, something my master could deny me if it suited him. As time lost meaning entirely, as cycles blurred into a continuous present of control and suffering, I came to understand the true genius of the Dark Eldar's cruelty. They do not just break bodies. They dismantle narratives. They take away the idea that things could be otherwise, until the world you inhabit feels inevitable. Standing beside my master in the galleries, watching new slaves dragged screaming into the arenas, I felt no shock, no outrage, only a distant recognition of myself as I once had been. I wondered briefly if that made me monstrous or simply adapted. The distinction no longer mattered. What mattered was that I was still alive, and that my life served a purpose that had nothing to do with hope or justice or meaning as I once understood them. This is what it means to live under a Dark Eldar Slave Master. Not constant screaming, not endless chaos, but a slow, deliberate reshaping of existence until survival itself becomes an act of surrender. If this story has any warning to offer, it is not about the cruelty of the Drukhari, for that is well known across the galaxy. It is about the fragility of the self, about how easily identity can be eroded when pain is systematic and mercy is a myth. I'm still alive. I'm still conscious. And in Commorragh, that is the greatest horror of all.